He is a god. His veins are said to flow with the celestial blood of the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami. His throne, the Chrysanthemum Throne, is the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy on earth. He is the emperor of Japan, the son of heaven. And for more than 1,000 years, this god was a prisoner. A lifelong captive in a cage so beautiful, so ornate, and so sacred, that few even recognized it as a prison. His jailers were not thugs in rags, but the most powerful men in the empire, his own courtiers, his own generals, his own shoguns. They bowed before him in public, calling him a living deity, while in private, they controlled his every meal, his every word, his every breath. They used his divine authority as a stamp to legitimize their own brutal rule, while the god himself sometimes starved in a dilapidated palace. This is not a story of a gradual decline. It is the story of a deliberate, systematic and centuries-long capture. It is the story of a golden cage, built with poetry, ceremony and silk, that was later reinforced with steel, surveillance, and the sword. And it is the story of what happened when one of the divine prisoners, an emperor named Daigo, decided he would rather die a man than live as a puppet god, and in his desperate bid for freedom, set his entire country on fire. To understand this 1,000-year imprisonment, we must first understand how the bars of the cage were forged. It didn't begin with an army or a coup. It began with something far more intimate and far more insidious: marriage. In the 9th century, during Japan's elegant Heian period, a clan of courtiers, the Fujiwara, perfected a system of control that was breathtaking in its simplicity and its ruthlessness. They were not of royal blood, so they could never sit on the throne themselves. But they figured out the next best thing. They would control the wombs that produced the emperors. The strategy was simple. The Fujiwara clan would ensure that their most beautiful and intelligent daughters were married to the reigning emperor. As soon as the empress, a Fujiwara woman, gave birth to a son, the clock would start ticking. The emperor, often still a young man himself, would be pressured, cajoled, and manipulated into abdicating the throne in favor of his infant son. This new emperor would be a toddler, a child who needed a regent to rule for him. And who would that regent, the Satsesh taught, be? His loving grandfather, the head of the Fujiwara clan. When the child emperor grew into a teenager, the regent would simply change his title to Sonkampaku Sot, a sort of chief advisor to the adult emperor, but the power remained absolute. The Fujiwara patriarch was the true ruler of Japan. The emperor was a mere symbol, a ritualistic necessity. His job was not to rule, but to exist, to be divine, to be a living work of art, trapped in the amber of ceremony. His life was a suffocating sequence of rites and rituals, dictated by calendars and omens, which direction he could travel, what color robes he must wear for a certain season, which poems he must compose, which ceremonies he must attend. These were the great decisions of his life. The palace in Heian, Kithot, modern-day Kyoto, was a world unto itself. It was a labyrinth of wooden halls, covered walkways, and meticulously manicured gardens. The air was thick with the scent of expensive incense, and the rustle of 12-layered silk robes worn by court ladies. It was a world of sublime art, of groundbreaking literature like the tale of Genji, of poetry contests and moon viewing parties. But underneath this shimmering surface, it was a hotbed of paranoia and intrigue. Every whisper, every glance, every poem could hold a hidden meaning, a political threat, a veiled insult. And for the emperor, it was a gilded cage. He was surrounded by Fujiwara relatives. His wife was a Fujiwara. His mother was a Fujiwara. His chief minister was a Fujiwara. His guards were appointed by the Fujiwara. He was a prisoner of his own family, a holy hostage, whose divinity was the very lock on his cell door. To rebel was unthinkable. It would be to rebel against his own mother, his own wife, the entire structure of the court that supposedly existed to serve him. Most emperors simply accepted their fate, living and dying as ceremonial figureheads. They chased aesthetic beauty, mastered calligraphy, and fathered heirs, who would continue the cycle. But not all of them went quietly, and when a prisoner in this golden cage rattled the bars, the consequences could be terrifying. Consider the fate of Emperor Sutoku. He ascended the throne as a boy of 5 in the year 1123, but the real power was held by his grandfather, the retired Emperor Toba. Sutoku's life was marred by a dark rumor, a poisonous whisper that he was not Toba's grandson, but his son, the product of an illicit affair between Toba and Sutoku's own mother. Toba despised him, calling him uncle, nephew. In 1142, Toba forced Sutoku to abdicate in favor of an infant half-brother, Kono. When Kono died young, Toba skipped over Sutoku's own son, placing another of his sons on the throne, Emperor Go Shirakawa. This was the ultimate insult. Sutoku had been utterly sidelined. When Toba finally died, Sutoku saw his chance. He gathered a small force of loyal samurai from the Minamoto and Taira clans, and made a bid for power in what became known as the Hachiden Rebellion. His forces were swiftly defeated by his brother, Go Shirakawa, who was backed by the more powerful factions of those same samurai clans. His punishment was a terrifying new precedent. For centuries, the person of the emperor was considered too sacred for violence. But this taboo was shattered. Sutoku was not executed, but he suffered a fate perhaps worse for a son of heaven. He was exiled. Stripped of his titles, he was banished to the remote province of Sanuki. There, in utter humiliation, he devoted himself to Buddhism, painstakingly copying sacred scriptures in his own blood to show his remorse. He sent the manuscripts to the court in Kyoto, hoping for forgiveness. His brother, Emperor Go Shirakawa, coldly refused the offering, fearing the scriptures were cursed. The story goes that he bit off his own tongue and wrote a new curse with the blood, swearing to become the great demon of Japan and to haunt the imperial family forever. He stopped cutting his hair and nails, growing into a terrifying, monstrous figure. When he died, it was said that a great storm raged, and the country was plunged into an era of war and chaos. The court became convinced that Sutoku had transformed into an santenri Kont, a vengeful ghost of immense power. Every fire, every plague, every political assassination that followed was blamed on Sutoku's curse. He was the ghost that haunted the golden cage, a terrifying reminder of what happened when a divine prisoner was pushed too far. Sutoku's failed rebellion was a sign of things to come. The elegant courtiers like the Fujiwara were losing their grip because a new, far more dangerous power was rising in the provinces. The samurai, the warrior class. For them, power didn't come from marriage politics or poetic subtlety. It came from the cold, hard edge of a sword. In 1185, after a brutal civil war, the samurai leader Minamoto no Yoritomo seized effective control of the country. He didn't depose the emperor. He didn't need to. He simply had the emperor grant him a new title, Sottai Taishpgunt, or Great Barbarian, subduing Generalissimo, the shogun, a military dictator who would rule Japan in the emperor's name. The golden cage of the Fujiwara was now replaced by an iron one, forged by the Kamakura shogunate. The emperor's authority was now purely symbolic. He was the source of legitimacy, but the shogun held all the military, administrative, and economic power. The imperial court in Kyoto remained, but it was a shadow of its former self. The real capital was now in Kamakura, hundreds of miles to the east, where the shogun's military government, the Danbakufu, held court, and the humiliation of the emperors reached depths the Fujiwara era could never have imagined. The flow of funds from the provinces once destined for the court was now redirected to the shogun and his vassals. The imperial family became impoverished. Their vast estates were seized by warriors. There are heartbreaking records from this period. The imperial palace, once a symbol of refinement, fell into disrepair. Roofs leaked, walls crumbled. On one occasion, a former emperor died, but his body lay unburied for weeks, because the court was so destitute it couldn't afford a proper funeral. The emperor himself, the son of heaven, was sometimes reduced to selling his own masterful calligraphy or autographed poems on the streets of Kyoto, just to raise money for palace repairs, or even for food. Can you imagine the scene? A being considered a living god, a descendant of Amaterasu, forced to become a common merchant. His divine artistry reduced to a commodity to be haggled over. The shogunate in Kamakura treated the emperors with a mixture of feigned reverence and utter contempt. They continued the old Fujiwara trick of forcing emperors to abdicate, often deposing them at will if they showed the slightest hint of independence. They were prisoners not just in their palaces, but in a state of enforced poverty and irrelevance. For nearly 150 years, this was the status quo. The gods were beggars, the warriors were kings. The system seemed unbreakable, but the shogunate made a critical mistake. They forgot that even a starved, humiliated god still possesses a power that no sword can ever truly conquer, the power of his own name. and in the year 1318, a man ascended the throne who had no intention of being a beggar. His name was Go-Daigo, and he was not like the emperors who came before him. He was intelligent, ambitious, and deeply resentful of his warrior jailers. He believed in his own divinity, not as a ceremonial fiction, but as a mandate to rule. From the moment he took the throne, he began to plot. He studied ancient Chinese texts on imperial power. He secretly reached out to disaffected samurai clans and powerful Buddhist monasteries, anyone who chafed under the shogun's rule. He was playing with fire, and he knew it. His first plot was discovered in 1324. The shogunate, in a show of force, executed his close allies. Go-Daigo himself was spared only because of his sacred status, but he was not deterred. He went underground, his plotting becoming more sophisticated. He used his own consorts to pass secret messages. He held poetry parties that were actually clandestine war councils. For years, he built his network in the shadows of the dilapidated palace. The court in Kyoto was a nest of spies for the shogun, but Go-Daigo was smarter. Then in 1331, his main conspiracy was betrayed. The shogun's armies marched on Kyoto. Go-Daigo, grabbing the sacred imperial regalia, the mirror, the sword, and the jewel that proved his divine lineage, fled the capital disguised as a woman. He was eventually captured. This time, the shogunate would not be lenient. They broke the ultimate taboo. Just as Sutoku had been exiled, Go-Daigo was stripped of his title and banished to the remote Oki Islands, a windswept prison in the Sea of Japan. To the shogun, the problem was solved. They placed a new puppet emperor on the throne and celebrated their victory. They had caged their god, but they had underestimated him. In 1333, with the help of loyalists, Go-Daigo staged a daring escape from the Oki Islands. He raised a small boat in a storm and made it back to the mainland. His return was like a spark in a powder keg. His story of defiance, of a god, king fighting his captors, inspired thousands. A key general of the shogunate, Ashikaga Tokoji, who had been sent to crush the last of Go-Daigo's loyalists, suddenly switched sides. He saw which way the wind was blowing. He marched his army back to Kyoto, not as a defender of the shogun, but as a liberator of the emperor. The shogunate's main fortress in Kamakura was attacked and burned to the ground. The Hachita clan, who had ruled as regents for the shogun for over a century, committed mass suicide. Against all odds, the prisoner had won. Go-Daigo returned to Kyoto in triumph. He had broken the iron cage. For the first time in 150 years, the emperor was the true ruler of Japan. He called it the Kenmu Restoration. It was a moment of breathtaking possibility. But this is where the tragedy truly begins. The prisoner, having spent his life dreaming of freedom, had no idea how to actually govern. Go-Daigo was an idealist, a man who wanted to restore the ancient, court-centered imperial rule of the Heian period. He didn't understand the rough, pragmatic world of the samurai who had put him in power. He handed out unequal rewards, favoring his court nobles over the warriors who had bled for him. He launched grandiose plans to build a new imperial palace while the country was still in chaos. He centralized power in his own hands, alienating the very men whose swords he depended on. The man who had switched sides to help him, Ashikaga Tokoji, felt betrayed. He had expected to be the new shogun, the emperor's right-hand man. Instead, he was sidelined. In 1335, just 2 years after the glorious restoration, Tokoji rebelled against Go-Daigo. The liberator turned on the man he had freed. Go-Daigo's dream collapsed into a nightmare. He was a brilliant conspirator, but a poor ruler. His warrior allies deserted him, flocking to Tokoji's banner. Once again, Go-Daigo was forced to flee Kyoto. Ashikaga Tokoji captured the capital, installed his own puppet emperor on the throne, a distant cousin of Go-Daigo, and had himself declared the new shogun. But Go-Daigo did not give up. He escaped to the remote Yoshino Mountains south of Kyoto. And here, he did something unprecedented. He declared that the emperor in Kyoto was an impostor, and that he, holding the true sacred regalia, was the legitimate son of heaven. He established a rival imperial court in the mountains. For the next 60 years, Japan would have 2 emperors. A northern emperor in Kyoto, controlled by the Ashikaga shoguns, and a southern emperor, the descendant of Go-Daigo, hiding in the wilderness. The war between the northern and southern courts tore Japan apart. Go-Daigo, the prisoner who broke the cage, had succeeded only in creating a larger, bloodier conflict. He died in exile, his dream of restored imperial power in tatters, whispering his regret and his desire to one day return to Kyoto. His rebellion ultimately failed. He had shown that the cage could be broken, but he also showed that the forces outside the cage were far too strong for any emperor to control alone. He had simply exchanged one prison for another, a gilded cage in Kyoto for a rugged one in the mountains, and in his wake the imperial office sank to its lowest point in history. The Ashikaga shogunate, born from this chaos, was weak. Its authority barely extended beyond Kyoto. The rest of Japan descended into a century of civil war, a bloody free, for, all known as the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Ambitious provincial lords, the Sodaime Sot, carved out their own domains and fought endlessly for supremacy. And what of the emperor in this age of violence? He was no longer even a prisoner. He was a pawn, a pathetic, impoverished, but symbolically useful relic. The emperor in Kyoto, the northern line that had won the war, was completely at the mercy of whichever warlord happened to be occupying the capital. His divine legitimacy was a prize to be won. A warlord who,